two main wall. Today we're looking at the ugly truth behind recycling, why recycling is a hoax and a sham. In 1950, the entire world as a whole produced 2 million tons of plastic. Fast forward 65 years, and the world's plastic production jumped 190 times. We're talking about 381 million tons made in 2015. Even worse, cumulatively, we made 7.8 billion tons total during those 65 years. When it comes to managing plastic waste, there are two main ways to deal with it. You can either manage it domestically or export it. Not many Americans know this, but since the 1990s, America's popular choice has been to export it. And actually, exporting plastic waste is rather routine now. The problem is, when you export it, you can't guarantee that the plastic will be treated and recycled for the better good of mankind. Most likely, the truth is, it's not really being recycled, but just dumped in poorer countries. It's like you taking your household trash out every few days, but dumping it in your neighbor's yard when they're not looking. So next time you put something in a recycling bin, it'll make you wonder if you're really helping the planet. Back in 2018, residents and city officials in Palo Alto, California, decided to look into where their recycling was going. Now, most of us average Americans may think the answer's simple, and you can trace it, but actually it's anything but. It all started in 2019 when news started circulating about plastic dumping in Bali, Indonesia. You see, Bali has been a major tourist attraction in Southeast Asia for decades, and the big reason for that comes down to the pristine nature and waters around the land. But nowadays, when the sun shines down on the waters surrounding Bali, not uncommon to see reflections from plastic waste floating in the water. In fact, plastic waste got so bad that its governor, Y.N. Coster, announced that a ban on single-use plastic bags, straws, and styrofoam would start. This was in late 2018, not long after a viral video that showed a diver swimming through large swaths of plastic debris off Bali's coast. Some say that Bali is in a state of waste emergency. When news about this reached the States, many residents of California heard about it. For example, citizens in Palo Alto got curious about their own city's waste management. They wanted to know if Palo Alto was sending its plastic waste to Southeast Asian countries like Bali. But honestly, even up today, there still is no definitive answer. The best the city was able to find was that about 40% of its recyclable waste stays in North America and gets processed according to strict environmental and labor standards. But the sad thing is, the other 60% gets shipped away mainly to Asia. Even sadder is, it's unclear how much of that even gets recycled, if at all. Basically, the trash becomes a problem in another country. And whether or not it's causing environmental or social problems overseas remains hidden, and there is no transparency at all around the entire process. Now, it's unclear which country receives Palo Alto's plastic trash, but Palo Alto isn't alone. Actually, recycling experts in the U.S. say that most U.S. cities would have difficulty figuring out just how much of their recyclables are actually being recycled. Right now, about half a dozen companies trade Palo Alto's recyclables on world markets, and these companies decline to name their trading partners or brokers, supposedly due to business reasons. Look, the thing is, if these companies were all operating for the public good and for the good of the planet, they would be proud to share the information. But the fact that they're not disclosing the information just makes it all more shady, if you ask me. And that's the sad truth behind recycling. It really makes me wonder how much environmental impact I'm really making every time I put a plastic bottle or plastic bag in a recycling bin. Back in 2020, Interpol noticed coordinated efforts to export plastic, particularly to Southeast Asia, in violation of national laws. The problem with the illegal waste trade is that it's not easy to track every suspicious shipment. According to a project coordinator at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, in the illegal waste trade, very often there are a lot of intermediaries, and it's easier than not to lose track of the waste travel. Plus, once the illegal waste finally reaches the destination country, they don't know what happened afterwards. Palo Alto's waste hauler, Green Waste, said that it couldn't fully trace where the city's waste was going because it conducts some recycling through middlemen called brokers. Brokers don't recycle things. Instead, they buy and sell them. And when Green Waste asked its brokers for information on where exactly they were selling this waste to, they didn't hear much back. And even that's an understatement. According to the chief operations officer for Berg Mill, one of the companies that buys materials from Green Waste, revealing where the waste was sold would give away to competitors the company's cost structure. He likened it to KFC revealing the original chicken recipe, or Ben & Jerry's revealing the secret sauce behind its ice cream. To Berg Mill, keeping the information confidential isn't a cover-up, but more for competitive advantage, says the company. If you're wondering why we haven't heard about this until recently, well, law enforcement officials are blaming it on trade rules. Recently, the international rules on plastic trade got tightened. Many say this pushed exports of plastics underground. Nevertheless, this isn't a new phenomenon. Believe it or not, the global recycling trade dates back at least 30 years. That's why the first world countries like the U.S. can keep the cost of recycling lower for consumers. Follow the money, I say. Now, in recent years, the global plastic trade has begun to shrink. That's because of new waste controls from developing countries. In fact, in 2021, U.S. plastic waste exports to Asia dropped to 330 million pounds. That's half of what it was in 2017. But even though plastic export levels are dropping, it's still a serious problem. Get this. According to one estimate, out of all the plastic waste in East Asia and the Pacific region, only about 9% of it gets recycled. 9%. That's a measly number, and it defeats the purpose of so-called recycling. It couldn't even put a dent to addressing environmental problems. And it only gets worse. The remaining 91% goes to landfills or straight into nature, and the consequences are disastrous. Research suggests that countries in Southeast Asia are among the top sources of ocean plastic since they're importing much of the plastic trash. In 2016, China imported more than half of the world's traded plastic waste. In fact, it was the world's largest importer of it. But in 2 years' time, by 2018, it imported less than 1%. So what happened? Well, in 2017, the Chinese government banned the import of most types of plastic waste. So then, wealthier nations need to find a new home for their trash. They started sending their plastic waste to other Asian countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. In 2018, just 1 year after the Chinese ban, imports to Southeast Asia more than tripled in Malaysia, doubled in Vietnam, and even grew tenfold in Thailand. Some environmental campaigners have since found mountains of abandoned trash on fire, evidence of toxins in local soil and food, and dozens of bootleg recycling operations in these countries. Consider, for example, the country of Laos. Laos doesn't even have the necessary factories to treat the volume of plastic waste arriving from wealthy countries. As a case in point, there's one informal dump site in this capital, Vientiane. At the site, you can find shredded plastic bags, discarded water bottles, and shards of styrofoam strewn across a 50-foot stretch at the bank of the Mekong River. And this is far from the only informal dump in this kind of condition. You can find 149 other informal dump sites across Laos, just like it, which leads plastics onto the 2,500-mile-long Mekong River. And eventually, all that waste ends up in the ocean. It's estimated that more than 10 million tons of plastic is dumped into our oceans across the globe each and every year. But let's return to Palo Alto, California. After officials of Palo Alto learned all this, they made a couple of changes. For example, back in May 2022, Palo Alto city staff actually requested to divert some of Palo Alto's waste streams to recycling facilities in Louisiana and Southern California. By doing this, it would apparently increase the city's domestic recycling rate to 60%. And if this change becomes permanent, it would apparently also increase the average citizen's recycling bill by around $33 a year, too. Also, Palo Alto realized that it couldn't transform the global recycling system alone. So back in March 2022, Palo Alto began talks with other interested cities in California about possible reforms to the local or state levels. I'm talking cities like San Jose and about a dozen other Northern California municipalities. Palo Alto, together with these cities, apparently also wants to expand recycling capacity in California by asking lawmakers to impose new transparent million barrels of oil to manufacture. But here's the thing. Right now, many Americans believe that plastic bags are all recyclable. But actually, it's not always as clear-cut as you might hope. Back on November 2022, the Office of California Attorney General Rob Bonta sent letters to the top manufacturers of plastic bags used by California grocery retailers. I'm talking about manufacturers like Novalex, Revolution, Interplast, Advanced Polybag, Metro Polybag, Travelway, and Paper Metler. Currently, all 7 claim that their plastic bags meet the recyclability requirements